Cafe Luna, Seasons of Adventure, Volume 1 by Lux Lucerne. Chapter 12. Sometime later, the party had finished their feast. Their bowls empty and their bellies full, they all slumped in their chairs. The snow was starting to pile outside as the city was coated in a blanket of white. The lanterns and trees donned snowy caps as the wind howled and moaned, racing through the streets. Though it was warm inside and their meals satisfying, they all patted their bellies and let out big sighs. Even Luffy was sitting slumped in his chair, belly up, with his paws resting on it. Just the top of his head was poking above the table, to everyone's delight. It was really satisfying. I haven't had such a good meal since the day I left here. I feel revitalized already, Zephyrard said, leaning back in his chair. It really has been wonderful. Just what we needed. Thank you again, dearie, Nixia said while smiling at Lunadia. I feel refreshed as well. That makes me happy to hear, though. Oh, with everything going on today, I forgot to prep something for dessert, she replied. Zephyrard slumped forward in his chair and raised a hand. Don't worry, I've got dessert covered, he said. Now let's rest a bit first. There's something I wanted to ask you about, Nixia. He picked up his sword that was sitting by his side the entire time they ate, and placed it back onto the table. The emerald on the crossguard glinted in the light, like the sun shining through trees. This isn't just any old magic sword, is it? Zephyrard said while staring at it. He always felt more comfortable with a sword at his side, ever since he started training. But this sword was different. Its presence was different. When he kept it near him, he felt safe and hopeful. He felt lighter, revitalized even, like the breeze blowing at his back. Sometimes, he even felt like people were praying for him or watching over him, washing over him like a warm embrace. But something different had happened after the expedition incident. All the other times it was feelings, a subtle aura that brought with it warmth and hope. But this time, it felt more like a message, a vision or premonition even. There was a clarity to it, a connection to someone, as if tied together by a thread of fate. Someone who he had never met, but knew deep inside his heart could be trusted. He stared at the blade for a moment, hand placed on the scabbard, but it felt like an eternity. It was filled with anticipation. Oberon is safe and is on the Sky Island, Zephyrard proclaimed, then turning to look at Lunadia. Your father is alive and well, I promise. I'm not sure how exactly, but I saw him in a waking dream. Lunadia stared into his eyes, listening intently, nodding. I was in the woods searching for him. It was close to where our airship was downed, around the Sylvan Updraft, he said, pointing a finger upwards. The Sylvan Updraft is the entrance to the Kalian Isles, an immense updraft leading to those dense clouds above that the Sky Islands reside on. He put a hand on his head and closed his eyes. I had searched around there before, looking for any kind of sign. All I had found was an airship graveyard, he said, shaking his head. But when I went to search for the second time, it was different. Something in the wind, like the faintest whisper. Eyes closed, he tried to grasp that vision, like a dream about to slip through your fingers as you wake. He whispered as if far off. I closed my eyes, feeling the wind swirl around me. I put a hand on the hilt of my sword and... He opened his eyes and looked at Lunadia again. It was like I could see him, standing up there on the Sky Island, smiling with that big grin of his. Gentle rolling hills, flower-filled meadows, and orchards of shining trees. She nodded at him. Her eyes grew a bit damp with dew as relief washed over her. I wasn't sure of everything, but she had faith, especially in Zephyrard. Sephiroth then turned to Nixia, keen eyes looking for answers. There was someone else with him, he said, watching the scene in his mind. A woman with shining blonde hair, dressed in a flowing green dress, and a sword at her side that had similar construction to mine. Her expression did not shift as she listened. Her eyes were steady, scholar's eyes. Eyes that had seen more of this world than you could imagine. I've never seen that person before in my life, but I felt a profound connection to her. I just knew I could trust her. She was the one contacting me, Sephiroth said, shaking his head, unsure. She waved to me, beckoning me to the island, smiling, gentle and kind, like the wind itself. He shook his head, bit his lip, and clenched a hand to his stomach. He felt that tightness of uncertainty. He looked to Lunaria. She sat quiet, but returned a gentle smile and a nod. Then he turned back to face Nixia. He had known her for years, ever since he had come to stay at Cafe Luna. But in this moment, she felt like a titan. What do you... he started, before stopping himself. He already knew that was the wrong question. He shook his head, dejected, and started again. What can you tell me about all this? The room went silent. Quiet like when it snows. She stared at him hard, eyes fixated like a falcon on its prey. Blue eyes, pale and piercing, glinting like ice. Different from her jovial self they had just shared a meal with. This is the woman that trained them. A chilling gaze, fitting for a master vice. Sephiroth did not waver amidst her intense aura. He noticed her eyes had a spark to them, a scholar filled with excitement on the edge of something very interesting. The tension broke. Not the cracking of ice underfoot, but the thaw of snow. Her expression softened as she let out a laugh and smiled. Sephiroth and Lunaria both let out a deep breath, being set free from the tension that gripped them. She closed her eyes and nodded. My. I remember when you first ended up on our doorstep, Sephiroth. A battered and bruised youngling, lost in the world, seeking the light at the top of the mountain, Nixia said, remembering days gone by. You too, Lunaria. Ever since that encounter, you had such passion. You both had a vision in your hearts, your souls that you had to fulfill. Finally, she opened her eyes and smiled at them both. You two have grown so much. Lunaria and Sephiroth were on the edge of their seats, happy with what she was saying, but also filled with anticipation. You're no longer just children. I suppose it's about time we let you in on our secrets, even if just a glimpse, Nixia said with a wink. Then she shrugged. Though even if we told you sooner, you might not have believed us. Most people wouldn't, she said, letting out a sigh. She waved her finger at them and looked them straight in the eye. Some things you two will have to figure out for yourselves, though. She sat up in her seat, rested her arms on the table, and interlaced her delicate fingers together. Now, tell me, what are the most powerful weapons you two have heard of? Nixia said, as she glanced at the both of them, expectant. They were both surprised at the question and turned to each other, not sure where this was going to take them. They traced back through their minds, thinking of every story they had heard. Sephiroth was the first to speak, raising an eyebrow at Lunaria. It's gotta be the legendary divine vision sparks of the Paragons, right, Luna? I can't think of any other weapon out there that has as much lore surrounding them, he said, still pondering. There are other named weapons of power out there, but none surpass those of the Paragons. the gods of their world. She tilted her head as she looked back at him. Those were the first that came into my mind. What else could surpass them? Vision sparks always have the greatest potential, growing alongside their wielder, she said, shaking her head. So is there anything greater than the weapons of those ascended to godhood? Nixia's expression did not change. She held out a hand, beckoning. Lunaria, Zephyrard, your vision sparks, please, she said in a stern tone. They did as commanded. Lunaria unclipped her wand from her hip and placed it on the table. Zephyrard slid his sword to the center as well. Nixia gathered them and placed them to the side for the moment. Now then, as you know, vision sparks are made with an elemental core, serving as a magical focus to channel your vision into reality. Nixia began, making open-handed gestures as if teaching a lesson. The soul is like the flame of a lantern, pure and bright, with your vision being the frame and lens built around it, born from your experiences and dreams. This lens shapes the intensity and color of light the flame gives off. She held up a finger, emphasizing what she was about to say. Vision sparks are the keystone of most magic users. By associating your vision spark with your vision, you gain improved clarity and power of imagination. This helps focus your mana, giving magic the form of that which you envision. Lunaria and Zephyrard sat listening like diligent students, nodding. They were familiar with these concepts. Luffy sat diligently as well, sitting still, staring at Nixia with wide eyes, head pulled back as if in surprise. Luffy wasn't quite sure what was going on, but he did his best to listen. Vision sparks are most often crafted as part of an adventurer's weapon, imbuing it with power while also acting as a magical focus. This leads them to being often the strongest magical weapons, while also being unique to the wielder, shaped and named in the image of their vision, Nixia continued. Then she took out a gem from her bag. She held it up in between her fingers. The greater the quality of the elemental core, the greater clarity to which it can attune to your vision, growing stronger alongside you. Her gaze intensified, staring at Lunaria and Zephyrard. Without any movement of exertion or even looking at the gem, her magic surged through it. The gem glowed bright, bright like the sun, dazzling and blinding, like fields of shimmering snow in the morning, before shattering, turning into a fine mist, like sleet in the breeze. Elemental cores can be overloaded and destroyed if the user's strength of soul exceeds the limits of the core. Imperfections in the gem are like cracks in a vision, and the brighter they shine, the more visible they become, distorting your mental imagery required for magic. Lunaria and Zephyrard sat stunned. They've seen vision sparks and elemental cores be overloaded before, mostly when budding adventurers outgrew their starter equipment, but those would merely pop and crack, like a splinter rupturing across a piece of glass. Nixia had just vaporized that core without an ounce of effort. Luffy was still stunned from just listening to her, even more so after watching her shatter the core. Nixia looked to Lunaria first. Lunaria, what is the name of this weapon and what images does it conjure in your mind? Taking the wand out of its holster, sapphires glinting in the light, she placed the silvery rod onto the table. Parceline, wand of gentle moonlight and sea of stars, Lunaria said, gazing at her wand. Sky and sea become one, starlit frost and tranquil water, she said, before pausing for a moment, thinking further. A token from my beloved mother, and a symbol of my bond with Zephyrard. My dream to heal the hearts of the weary, no matter where I may go, delivering them from darkness like gentle moonlight. Nixia nodded, then she turned to Zephyrard, her eyes like a hawk locked on its target. You next, Zephyrard. What is the name of this weapon and what is it to you? She said, unsheathing the sword. She placed the silver blade next to the wand, emerald swirling with light in the crossguard. Morir, blade of blessed wind and dawn of spring, Zephyrard said, gazing at his sword. Green forests and fields of flowers, where the breeze is gentle and sweet, bathed in golden light. He seemed lost for a moment, gazing into the emerald, thinking of leaves rustling in the wind and dandelions drifting in the breeze. It's the wind at my back, guiding the way. It is my hope for a brighter tomorrow that I want to share with Lunadia, to share with the world. Nixia looked at Lunadia and Zephyrard. I hear you both. I see the visions in your hearts, your hopes and dreams that bring forth your power, that manifests in your elemental abilities as you struggle through this world, Nixia began. Her face softened, and she smiled. I'm proud of you both. You've come so far since Auburn and I started training you. You've earned the right to know. She placed a hand on each of their weapons. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then a pulse of magic filled the room. Your vision sparks are made from divine cores, gems from the divine beasts who have watched over this world for millennia, Nixia whispered. Parceline and Aurier were lifted into the air, swirling around one another as if dancing. Gentle starlight and ribbons of water enveloped the wand, as streams of shining wind and puffs of dandelions swirled around the sword. An aura of warmth and safety filled the room as the two vision sparks resonated with each other. The ground beneath them turned to tranquil water, reflecting a sea of stars above them, a swirling cosmos of purples and blues, soft moonlight enveloping them. Around them appeared lush trees and flowers blossoming, the rustle of the leaves in the breeze, the call of birds, the warmth of the sun at dawn. Day followed night, night followed day, as the two blended together in equinox. I could feel emotions of people's joy and hope, to be surrounded by love and to be in awe of nature's beauty. The feeling of dazzling festivals full of life and the warm comfort of feasting together. Smiles all around, shining like a beacon in the dark. Though Nadia and Zephyrard did not need to look at each other, they both felt it, the connection in their hearts, amplified through their relic weapons. That sense of tender love and hope, as if embracing together next to a fireplace. Their picture of the world grew in clarity, though at the same time it expanded beyond comprehension, leaving more questions than answers. But in that moment their feelings intertwined. Hope filled their souls, pure and clear as a ringing bell. They would walk to that new dawn together. While Lunati and Zephyrard shared that beautiful moment, Luffy was even more stunned and confused by what was going on. If he pulled his head back in surprise any further, he would have started to roll away. Nixia waved her hand, and the vision sparks calmed, settling back down onto the table once again. She holstered the wand and sheathed the sword, then passed them back to their rightful owners. Do you still have hope? Nixia said, turning to Lunati and smiling. Your mother Edelyn, she's still out there, you know. I know she's been gone for many years now, but she's still out there. I never lost hope. I can feel it, Lunati replied, not looking up. She held her wand porcelain in her hand, feeling the cool touch of metal and wood in her palm. I know she's still thinking about me, watching over me, wherever she is. Your wand was modeled after your mother's. Her vision spark has a divine core as well, Nixia said before turning to Zephyrard. And yours? Well, you saw for yourself. Zephyrard nodded, his keen insight piecing together all the pieces. Aurier, the blade that never left his side, connected him to her. Whoever that woman was, they shared a bond, and she could be trusted, sure as the dawn that breaks the night. Nixia sat still, giving them a moment. Then, with her imposing aura, she claimed their attention once more. You've both heard stories surrounding legendary vision sparks. Weapons, armors, rings, amulets, items of immense power, capable of the most heroic and dastardly of feats. Both Lunati and Zephyrard snapped back to attention, like students dodging the ire of their professor. Though it is not so much the vision spark itself that is of note, Nixia continued to profess. It is the wielder that makes them so special. Any object can become an extension of the wielder's will. Though mundane armaments have limits, they will break under the pressure of powerful foes, or even under the wielder's exertion. Zephyrard nodded at this. That fateful day that had sent him down this path was one of terror. When your equipment fails you at the time you need it most, an immense rain of despair falls upon you. Magic weapons are a level above this, crafted with fine materials to act as a catalyst for enchantment. But those too have limits, albeit beyond what an average adventurer would encounter. Nixia continued, before gesturing with open hands towards her two students. I'm sure you've surmised that vision sparks are the next step above this. The divine paragons are said to be the first to wield vision sparks, crafted from divine cores, the most pristine and powerful of elemental cores. Lunati and Zephyrard looked to each other, thoughts going between them without the need for words. The divine paragons would face greater and greater danger as they traveled, so surely they needed equipment to match the challenge. Zephyrard started. No normal magic item could withstand the power to challenge the Elder Calamities, those that are destruction and disaster incarnate. So going off of that, they must have needed something on the same level as the Elder Calamities to challenge them. Divine cores from the divine beasts, protectors of the land, antithesis to the Calamities, Lunatia continued. Vision sparks with the most pristine and divine clarity, to act as a true extension of the wielder's will. A person's vision manifested, given physical form. That which could bring their vision to reality. The power of divinity to make change and to create the world they wished for. They nodded to each other, content with their conclusion. They turned to Nixia, awaiting their judgment. She smiled and nodded. Good. It is with the divine cores that the Paragon's vision sparks were able to withstand their arduous journey. Though that is not to say it is because of the divine cores that they've reached divinity, Nixia said, speaking slowly with care. You both have in your possession divine vision sparks, just as the Paragons do. Though everyone has the potential to have a spark of divinity, to create and to bring change, Nixia said before pausing, taking a moment to look at the two of them. She held up a finger, leaned forward, and smiled, as if about to share a secret that everyone knew but had forgotten. It is because we hope and dream, no matter how foolish, that we aspire to the stars and to delve the depths. To hope and to dream, Lunatia whispered. Everyone does that, don't they? To chase their dreams, to explore unseen horizons, wishing for a brighter tomorrow. I think that's beautiful, Zephyrard whispered in return. Everyone has that potential in them. That spark of divinity, I suppose, to create and shape something beautiful. That spark is within everyone, all of mankind, Nixia said, her eyes tender and filled with joy, as if looking at something beautiful. Though hope must be cultivated and nurtured, without effort it can never be brought to fruition, no matter the potential it holds, she said, crossing her arms. She closed her eyes, smirking. Those divine paragons. They carried with them the hopes and dreams of all mankind. That's why they've ascended to godhood. Zephyrard tilted his head, thinking about the way she said that. He glanced over to Lunatia, who returned a slow, thoughtful nod. Now then, to get back to your original question, what you experienced was a spiritual message perceived through your vision spark, Nixia said, opening her eyes and waving a finger to the side. To explain it, we must first look at the nature of vision sparks. Vision sparks are not simply forged, they are born. They are given names. They grow alongside their wielder, seeing the world and all its wonders, she said, taking out her own vision spark, Glacius, a wand similar in build to Lunadia's. They carry with them a story and their master's will, an extension of one's being, a personal weapon, Nixia explained, gesturing with her wand effortlessly. To further this idea, we are creatures of bonds. Our connection to the world, to the people we meet, and especially those we love. What is most meaningful is the bonds we share. Vision sparks can feel those bonds as well, and can become conduits enhancing our connections. Lunadia and Zephyrard held their vision sparks focusing on them, trying to take all this in. They stayed quiet. Nixia looked at Lunadia, not with those piercing eyes of rime and frost, but something softer, something far off. Eyes blue like a babbling stream, frost beginning to thaw. Her expression grew tender. Can you feel the bond you share with your mother? Nixia said softly. Her departure wasn't goodbye. You still live under the same sky, at the same time as her, wherever she is now. She'll be back one day. I miss her so much. Having meals with her, listening to all her silly stories explaining the world, Lunadia said, her eyes beginning to water, the thaw of frozen memories. But I always felt her with me, like she was watching over me. She clutched her wand in her hand. Nixia held her wand aloft and gazed into the pale sapphires, thinking back on halcyon days. Then she looked up to Lunadia. You look just like her, Nixia said with a smile. You've got all her tender warmth and compassion, even her taste for sweets, she said as she patted her belly, remembering all the delicious treats she had shared with Edelin. Don't you worry, dearie. She's still out there. I can feel her presence with my wand, Glacius, she said, twirling it. Your parents and I all have vision sparks from when we traveled together. Yours is modeled after your mother's and shares her story. We all share a bond that ties us together. Lunadia wiped her eyes and nodded. She clutched her wand to her chest and imagined her mother there, holding her. A comforting, warm embrace. Now then, as for you, Nixia said, turning to Zephyrard, as you may suspect, your sword shares a bond with your mystery woman. When weapons have a common history and origin, they tend to have an innate connection, she said, gesturing to his blade or ear. Nixia grinned happily with anticipation. Even though you've never met that woman, you share a connection that you'll have to discover yourself. Zephyrard rubbed his chin with one hand while holding his sword in the other. He wasn't quite sure what to make out of all this. Oh, he knew he felt safe with the rear at his side. Whoever that woman was on the Sky Island, he was going to find out her story. Oh, he could only think of one group of people that explored the Kalian Isles in their entirety. The Kalian Isles are the domain of the divine beast of wind, and with the dangers of ascending through the Sylvan updraft, it was not a frequented zone for adventuring. So as he mulled over these things, he was not met by pangs of tightness in his stomach, but uplifting thoughts which imbued him with lightness. There was a moment of quiet contemplation around the table. Both Lunani and Zephyr knew there was something bigger to all this. They didn't need to communicate it to each other, though there was still a slight wonder that started to stir in both of their hearts. Lunadia was first to break the silence. Hey, Zeph, have you ever felt anything like this spiritual message before? Lunadia inquired. She tilted her head as she looked at him, her expression affable and soft. Sometimes I get the feeling you were in trouble or afraid all of a sudden. When I felt like that, I always held Parceline and prayed for you, Lunadia said, closing her eyes for a moment, clutching her wand to her chest. There were times where it was the other way around too. It always felt like you were there with me, just out of sight. You know, this is the first time it was so clear and vivid, like a dream, Zephyrard said, looking at his sword. He turned and looked into her eyes, gentle as the rains, feeling that bond they shared. Though I felt like that a lot while I was away training. There were a lot of times when I was alone and uncertain, where I'd just hold over ear. I'd think about you being there, supporting me, he said earnest, his heart laid bare. It always brought me such relief. I felt like a hug from behind, given by someone you can't quite see, but whose presence is overwhelmingly comforting. Well, that makes me happy then, but Lunadia said as she leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, pouting. This explains a whole lot. I would think of that exact image when I prayed for you, she said, shaking her head and laughing. I used to think I was going crazy or that I could sense spirits or ghosts or something. She held her wand in front of her, looking at it as she twirled it around. I've always had Parceline at my side ever since my mother left when I was young. And I've kept having these experiences, she said, letting out a sigh. She closed her eyes and tried to grasp at those feelings that tugged at the heart and dampened the eye. Sometimes, when I was anxious and afraid, I'd hold my wand and think of her. It felt like she was around the corner, whispering to me that it was going to be okay. Nixia looked at Lunadia and chuckled. Well, there's more truth to that than you think, she said, smiling. Your spiritual sensitivity, your awareness of the world's nature around you, does play a role in how effective spiritual messages can be, Nixia continued. Both you and Zephyrard are deeply attuned to what's happening around you. That keen insight picks up on those subtle spiritual messages, even if you're not fully conscious of them. It is often a feeling of intuition. Lunadia let out a sigh, crossing her arms on the table, resting her chin on them. This is too much at once. There's something bigger to all of this, isn't there? She said, twirling her wand in her fingers, her expression dejected. I guess this is why my father was always so tight-lipped about everything. I just wish he was more open with me, especially now that I'm older, she said, exasperated. She bit her lip. Not knowing scares me. I don't want to lose the people I love. Zephyrard felt that pang of sorrow in his heart, wincing for a moment. He pulled his chair over next to hers and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. She turned her head to him, and her expression softened as he gave her a tender-hearted nod. Luffy had recovered from being stunned now that the energy in the room had shifted. This had left him quite exhausted, and he could tell Lunadia was too. He plodded along slowly and clumsily climbed into Lunadia's lap, his feet slipping as he reached up. He rubbed his head against her belly and let out a pitiful moan. Meow. Nixia shook her head. Just know that your father has always acted out of love for you, she said, letting out a tired breath. I don't agree with all his decisions, but his heart has always been in the right place. Always. I know, Auntie Nixia, I know. Lunadia mumbled into her arm, stroking Luffy in her lap. A silence blanketed over the room, thoughts swirling like the storm outside, howling. The wind moaned as it ripped through the quiet streets. The snow continued to fall.